The overhead lights in courtroom 7 hummed the way old buildings do in winter, a low, indifferent drone that filled every silence. I had been sitting at the defendant's table for 11 minutes when Martin Voss finally decided I was worth looking at. He was the kind of lawyer who wore his suits like armor. Dark charcoal, perfectly pressed, a silk tie that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked at my flannel shirt, the green one with the frayed collar that I'd bought at a Goodwill on Route 9, and then he looked at my shoes, and something shifted in the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the expression a man makes when he realizes the game is already over. "Your Honor," he said, turning back to Judge Carolyn Rusk with practiced ease, "I'd like to draw the court's attention to Exhibit F, Mr. Holt's current financial disclosures." He paused just long enough. "As filed, my client's husband reports monthly income of approximately $1,900 from part-time tutoring at Millbrook Community Center. His total liquid assets are documented at $11,200. Meanwhile, my client, Sandra Holt, serves as Chief Financial Officer at Apex Property Group, one of the region's most respected real estate development firms, with annual compensation of $220,000. Plus performance incentives. He let that settle like dust after a demolition. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. A fair division of marital assets, weighted to reflect actual financial contribution. My client built most of what this couple has. The retirement accounts, the home in Westfield, the investment portfolio. Mr. Holt's contribution to the household over the past 3 years has been, to put it charitably, minimal. Someone in the gallery shifted. I knew my daughter was back there, sitting with her aunt, my wife's younger sister, because my wife had insisted on it, and the court had allowed it since Claire was 16 and old enough to observe. I could feel her eyes on the back of my head, and I focused very hard on the grain of the wooden table in front of me. My attorney, Amy Sheridan, a third-year associate at a non-profit legal aid organization who had taken my case pro bono, put a hand on my forearm. She was 29 years old and nervous in the way that good people are nervous when they know more than they can say. I had asked her to say nothing unless I told her to. She thought I was making a mistake. She'd told me so. Twice. In the parking lot before we came in. She was wrong. Judge Rusk looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, gray hair cut short, with the kind of expression that comes from 22 years on the family court bench. She had seen every version of this. The bitter husband, the vindictive wife, the couple who had already decided the outcome before they walked through the door. She looked at me the way she probably looked at all of them, steady, patient, impossible to surprise. "Mr. Holt," she said, "you've been very quiet this morning. Before we move to final arguments, the court needs to confirm your identifying information for the record." She looked down at her documents. "Can you please state your full legal name and your most recent professional occupation?" I took a breath. This was the moment. "Raymond Arthur Holt," I said. "Retired Special Agent, Criminal Investigation Division, Internal Revenue Service, 31 years of service." The courtroom went very still. Judge Rusk's pen stopped moving. She looked up at me slowly, and I watched something happen behind her eyes: recognition, calculation, the rapid rearrangement of everything she thought she understood about what was happening in her courtroom. Her hand went flat against her notepad. Martin Voss frowned. "Your Honor, I'm not sure what." "Mr. Voss." She said it quietly, the way you speak when you're trying to remain calm and you're not entirely sure you'll succeed. "Please sit down." She turned to her clerk, a young man named Terrence, who had been working for her for 4 years and who now looked like he might be sick. She said something to him in a voice too low for me to hear. He stood up immediately and moved toward the side door with the deliberate speed of someone trying not to appear to be running. My wife, Sandra, leaned forward in her seat at the plaintiff's table. She was wearing a cream blazer, her dark hair pulled back the way she wore it for important meetings. She looked polished and certain, the way she had looked every morning for the 3 years she'd been at Apex. She looked at me, and I watched the certainty begin to loosen. "Ray," she said. Her voice was careful. "Testing. What is this?" I didn't answer her. Martin Voss was on his feet. "Your Honor, I must object to whatever procedural irregularity. The side door opened. 3 people walked in. 2 men and a woman, all in dark coats, all moving with the flat efficiency of people who did this for a living. The woman in front had a badge clipped to her belt that caught the courtroom light. IRS Criminal Investigation. I had called in a lot of favors to make sure they sent people I trusted. Sandra Ellen Holt. The lead agent's voice was even. Professional. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit tax fraud, filing false federal returns on behalf of Apex Property Group, and obstruction of a federal investigation. My wife stood up from her chair as if pulled by a wire. No, she said it once, then again, louder. No, this is Ray. What did you do? What did you do? Martin Voss was talking loudly about judicial process and the sanctity of ongoing legal proceedings. The agents were not listening. They moved around the plaintiff's table with practiced calm, and Sandra was still saying my name, not with love, not with fear, exactly, but with the voice of someone who had miscalculated something fundamental and was only now beginning to understand the scale of the error. The handcuffs made a sound that echoed off the paneled walls. My daughter made a sound from the gallery that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I sat in my faded flannel shirt and I did not look away from my wife's face as they walked her out of courtroom 7. I needed her to understand, without words, that I had not done this to her. She had done this to herself. I had only made sure the truth had somewhere to go. My name is Raymond Holt. Most people call me Ray. I spent 31 years as a special agent with IRS Criminal Investigation, which means I spent 31 years following money through the places it tries to hide. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified depreciation schedules, fraudulent deductions buried inside legitimate business expenses the way a splinter hides under skin. I was good at finding things that didn't want to be found. I retired at 60 on a Tuesday morning in March, with a cake in the break room and a handshake from my regional director and a folded American flag that had flown over the Capitol building, because one of my cases had put a sitting congressman's brother-in-law in federal prison and someone in Washington had decided that deserved acknowledgement. I went home that afternoon to the house in Westfield, poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat on the back porch and thought, now what? My wife and I had been married for 22 years at that point. We had met at a charity gala for a children's hospital. I was there representing the agency at some interagency function. She was there with a college friend who worked in development. She was 42, recently divorced, raising our eventual daughter from a previous relationship, sharp-tongued in the way I've always found attractive, and she had no patience for small talk. We were married 14 months later. For most of those 22 years, I thought we were honest with each other. Not perfectly happy, no one is. Not always, but honest. I thought that was the foundation. Turns out foundations can look solid from the surface right up until the moment they fail. Sandra had always worked in finance, bookkeeping, accounts management, CFO roles at mid-sized companies. She was good at it, meticulous and organized in ways I found almost beautiful. When she was recruited by Apex Property Group to serve as their CFO 2.5 years after my retirement, I was happy for her. The compensation was exceptional. The role was a genuine step up. Donovan Pierce, the CEO, was the kind of man who collects people. 55, silver-haired, the sort of tan that requires a second home somewhere warm. He called Sandra personally to extend the offer. He told her she had executive instincts. He used the word visionary in a context that made me mildly uncomfortable even then, though I couldn't have said why. The late nights started within 6 months. I told myself it was the job. A new CFO role at a growing real estate development firm, of course, there would be long hours. Of course, there would be dinners with clients and investors. Of course, there would be weekends where she was on her phone more than she was present. I had spent 31 years married to the IRS, in ways that weren't always fair to my family. I told myself this was her time. I noticed the distance before I noticed anything else. We stopped talking the way we used to talk about small things, the texture of a day, the kind of conversation that isn't about anything in particular but means everything. Sandra started speaking to me in the way people speak to someone they've already decided about. Like a verdict delivered calmly. I came home early from a fishing trip in October. My buddy had to leave a day ahead because of a family thing, and I didn't want to stay alone, and I found her. She was in the kitchen, on the phone. And the way her voice changed when she heard the door, the way her body moved, not guilty exactly, more like someone performing composure, told me everything before I heard a single word. I won't tell you what she said. It's not the point. The point is that when she finally hung up, she turned around and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not remorse, something calculating underneath the remorse. Like she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. "I think we should talk about next steps," she said. "I think so too," I said. She hired Martin Voss within the week. I could have fought her. Lord knows I had resources she didn't know about. But something made me stop. I stood in my home office that first night, the room where I'd spent 31 years building cases, where the habits of mind never really retire, and I looked at what Sandra had walked into. I knew Apex Property Group. Not personally, but professionally. I had heard the name in circles I used to move in. Real estate development in our region had become a preferred vehicle for a particular kind of financial creativity in recent years. And the more I thought about Donovan Pierce, the personal recruitment, the exceptional compensation, the long hours that didn't quite map onto what a regional development firm actually required, the more something itched in the back of my mind, the way a problem itches when you already know the answer and you just haven't written it down yet. I made one call. To Walter Briggs, my closest friend from 30 years of working adjacent agencies, retired FBI, now playing golf badly and missing the work. I met him at a diner outside town, the kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee that comes in a pot with a burnt bottom, and I told him what I was looking at. Walter listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always respected about him. Then he said, "You know, if Apex is what you think it is, Pierce has been greasing a lot of wheels for a long time." "I know. If you go through official channels and he's got someone inside who tips him." "I know, Walter." He was quiet for a moment. "How deep is Sandra in it?" I looked at my coffee. "That's what I need to find out." He studied me across the table. Walter was 64 years old and had the face of a man who had stopped being surprised by human behavior around 1998. "What are you thinking, Ray?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that if I'm just a retired government worker whose wife is leaving him for her boss, nobody looks at me twice. You want to go quiet? Completely quiet. I take the bad deal on the asset division. I move out. I tutor math at the community center. I'm exactly what they think. I'm a man who spent his whole career doing a job nobody cared about and now doesn't know what to do with himself. And while I'm doing that, I build a case that doesn't disappear when someone makes a phone call." Walter was quiet for a long time. Through the diner window, a woman was loading groceries into a minivan, and we both watched her without seeing her. "Claire," he said finally. "I know. She's going to be living with Sandra. With whatever is going on inside that house. If Pierce is running what you think he's running." "I know, Walter." I said it more sharply than I meant to. Then quieter. "That's why I need the case to be airtight before anything moves. If I go too soon and it falls apart, Sandra's lawyers get her clear, Pierce's people make evidence disappear, and my daughter grows up inside a criminal enterprise with no idea what she's living in." I looked at him. "I need it to be the kind of case that only ends one way." Walter nodded slowly. Then he picked up his coffee. "Tell me what you need." What I needed was time. I moved into a 2-bedroom rental on Maple Street that smelled like someone's grandmother had lived there for 30 years and recently vacated. I took the tutoring position at Millbrook Community Center Algebra and Pre-Calculus for adults working toward their GEDs. I drove a 2009 Civic that needed new brake pads. I wore the kind of clothes a man wears when he has stopped caring about what people think of his clothes. Martin Voss's firm sent letters about the asset division, about my failure to maintain appropriate financial standing, about the house in Westfield and the investment accounts and the retirement funds that Sandra's attorney claimed were substantially built on her contributions. I responded to none of it with anything they didn't expect from a man who had given up. My daughter thought I had given up. She was 15 when Sandra and I separated, 16 now. She was smart and furious, and she loved her mother with the fierce, uncritical love of a child who wasn't ready to see a parent as a person with flaws and choices. She looked at my rental apartment with poorly concealed dismay. She looked at my flannel shirts and my 11-year-old car, and she said things that were designed to hurt because she was hurting and I was the safest target. "Mom says you could have fought for more," she told me one Sunday afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table with a bowl of cereal she wasn't eating. "Your mom might be right about that," I said. "She says you just quit. Like you always quit when things got hard." I sat down across from her. "What do you think?" She looked at me. 16 years old, her mother's sharp eyes and her own particular version of stubborn. "I think you're not telling me everything." "That's probably true." "That's not an answer, Dad." "I know, sweetheart." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers, and she let me, which told me more than anything she'd said. "I need you to trust me for a little while longer. Can you do that?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she pulled her hand back and picked up her spoon. "I don't really have a choice, do I?" It wasn't quite a question. "No," I said honestly. "Right now you don't. I'm sorry about that." She nodded once, very slightly, like someone accepting an unfair ruling. It was the hardest moment of the entire 3 years. The investigation took 17 months. I want to be precise about what Donovan Pierce was running, because it matters that you understand it wasn't complicated in its essence, only in its architecture. Real estate development is an industry built on complexity projects spanning years. Costs that shift, valuations that require judgment, 100 legitimate reasons why numbers don't perfectly align. Pierce had understood this for a long time. Apex Property Group served, on paper, as a regional developer of commercial and mixed-use properties. What it actually served was as a mechanism to pass money through real transactions, real buildings, real contractors, real tenants, while systematically misrepresenting costs, inflating deductions, and understating income across a network of related entities that had been constructed specifically to obscure the flow. The money that moved through Apex came from sources that required cleaning. Pierce had been offering that service for at least 8 years. Sandra's role had evolved. I believe I choose to believe. And it matters that I'm honest about the word choose that she came into Apex without understanding the full scope. CFO roles at development firms involve exactly the kind of financial complexity that can hide wrongdoing in plain sight if the CEO manages the information carefully. But by the time I started looking, she had been signing documents for 2 years that a person with her expertise could not have signed in genuine innocence. Whether Pierce had brought her in slowly, shown her a little more each quarter until she was too deep to step back, or whether she had understood earlier and made a different kind of choice, I never found a document that answered that question definitively. It matters, morally. It didn't matter legally. I worked nights. Encrypted drives, secure connections, the kind of operational habits you never fully unlearn. Walter fed me information when he could, connected me with 2 agents at IRS CI who had been building a parallel case on Apex from a different angle. They hadn't found what I'd found, and I hadn't found what they'd found. And when we put it together in month 14, it was significantly more complete than either thread had been alone. I had one problem: timing. The asset division hearing had been scheduled. If I moved too soon, before the arrest warrant was ready, Pierce's attorneys would file every injunction available, and the document trail would start to develop interesting gaps. I needed the warrant signed, and the agents in position before anyone on Pierce's side had any indication the walls were moving. I called the lead agent on my side, a woman named Carol, whose last name I'm going to leave out because she's still working, and I said, I need them to move on a specific date. Inside a courtroom, Carol was quiet for a moment. I know, but Sandra will be in courtroom 7 at 9 in the morning on the 14th. Pierce's office is 6 blocks away. If you move on both simultaneously at 15 minutes into the hearing, neither of them gets a warning the other is being taken. Another pause. You want it to happen in front of a judge. I want there to be no question, I said, about who was where and what they knew and what the sequence of events was. A courtroom is the cleanest possible record. Carol said she would see what she could do. 2 weeks before the hearing, I met with Amy Sheridan in her office at the legal aid nonprofit, and I told her almost everything. Not the details of the investigation that wasn't hers to carry, but enough so that she understood why I needed her to do exactly what I said. She looked at me across her desk, which was covered in color-coded folders, and she said, "You've been playing this man the whole time." "The whole time? How long?" 17 months, give or take. "And your wife?" I looked at the window. Outside, a city bus was pulling away from a stop. "She made choices," I said. "Some of them she maybe didn't fully understand at first. Some of them she did." I looked back at Amy. "I'm not here to protect her from the consequences of those choices. I'm here to make sure my daughter doesn't spend the next decade of her life inside a situation that was built on fraud." Amy looked at me for a long time. She was 29 years old, and she had, I suspected, expected this job to involve more straightforward injustice and fewer retired federal agents conducting parallel undercover operations. She took a breath. "What do you need me to do? Come to court. Sit next to me. Say nothing until I tell you to, and then do exactly what I say." She picked up a pen. "Put it down. This is not standard legal practice. I know. I'm not a standard client." She almost smiled. "No, you are definitely not that. On the morning of the 14th, I woke up at 4:30 because I had not slept past 4:30 in 17 months. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and looked at the photographs on the refrigerator, 2 of Claire at different ages, one from before all of this and one from last Thanksgiving, when she'd come for dinner and we'd made too much food, and she'd beaten me at 3 straight games of cards and gone home in a slightly better mood than she'd arrived in. I thought about what I was about to do. Not the mechanics of it. Those had been set for weeks. The warrant signed, the agents briefed, the timing coordinated with Carol's team. I thought about Sandra. I thought about 22 years and the things that had been real inside them. I thought about Claire and her mother's sharp eyes, and the way my daughter had said, "I don't really have a choice, do I?" and had accepted it anyway. I thought about the moment, coming soon now, when my daughter would understand all of it. What her mother had been doing. What her father had been doing. What truth costs and what it's worth. I got dressed. Flannel shirt, khaki pants, the shoes with the worn-down heel. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and thought about the 31 years behind me and what I was about to walk into, and I felt not triumph, something quieter. The particular calm of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and can see the place where he's going to set it down. I drove to the courthouse in my 2009 Civic, and I walked through the metal detector, and I sat down in courtroom 7, and I waited for Martin Voss to finish looking at my shirt. The courtroom chaos after Sandra was taken lasted about 9 minutes. Martin Voss objected through most of it with the professional persistence of a man who bills by the hour and has strong feelings about procedural irregularity. The agents were not moved. When they walked my wife out, she was still saying my name. Judge Rusk waited for the room to settle. Then she removed her reading glasses and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between disbelief and a very restrained form of respect. "Mr. Holt," she said. "Former Special Agent Holt. I've been provided, this morning, with a summary brief from the IRS Criminal Investigation Team. I want to say, for the record, that in 22 years on this bench, I have not presided over anything quite like what just happened in my courtroom. I apologize for the disruption, Your Honor. Don't." She was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Voss. Given the material change in circumstances regarding your client's legal status, I'm suspending these proceedings pending review. You'll want to consult with your own counsel before we reconvene. I suspect you may have your own set of problems once the federal investigation turns its attention to Apex Property Group's legal representation." Martin Voss had gone the particular shade of pale that expensive suits don't protect you from. He sat down heavily. Judge Rusk looked at me again. "Given the circumstances as documented, I'm granting a temporary emergency order awarding you primary custody of your daughter, effective immediately, pending a full review." Given that the minor's current primary residence is now a crime scene and its primary occupant has been taken into federal custody, I don't anticipate the review will present complications. I closed my eyes. Mr. Holt. I opened them. Go get your daughter. Claire was in the gallery. She was standing, and she had been crying, and when I walked toward her, she took one step back as if she needed that distance to see me clearly. Dad. Her voice was careful in the way voices are when the person speaking is trying to understand too many things at once. What just happened? What was all of that? I stopped a few feet from her and looked at my daughter. 16 years old and trying very hard to be steady. Your mother was involved in something she shouldn't have been involved in, I said. I found out. I spent the last year and a half building a case so that when the truth came out, there was no way it could be made to disappear. Claire's face was doing a complicated set of things. You were this whole time? The tutoring, the apartment? All of it. All of it. You weren't. You didn't just give up. No, I said. I didn't. She stared at me. Something shifted in her expression, not relief exactly, not forgiveness, nothing as simple as either of those things. More like the specific adjustment a person makes when a fact they believed turns out to have been wrong, and the correction changes the shape of a significant number of other things. Is Mom going to prison? She asked. There will be a trial. She's been offered a plea agreement. I don't know yet what she'll decide. And you didn't try to protect her. From this. I held her gaze. She made choices, sweetheart. Serious ones. I couldn't protect her from the consequences of those choices without making sure the truth never came out, and I wasn't willing to do that. Claire looked at me for a long moment. Outside in the corridor, I could hear footsteps, voices, the ordinary sounds of a courthouse on an ordinary morning that had turned out not to be ordinary at all. Okay, she said finally. Very quietly. Okay? I mean, she pressed her lips together. I don't know how to feel about any of this yet. I don't think I'm supposed to feel okay about it. But, she looked at her shoes, then back at me. The tutoring thing, the flannel shirts, all of it. A complicated breath. You didn't give up on me. No, I said. I never even considered it. She nodded once. Then, she picked up her backpack from the gallery seat and walked toward me, and she put her head against my shoulder the way she had when she was 7 years old. And the world had been simple, and I had been able to fix things by arriving, and I put my arm around her, and we stood there in courtroom 7 for a long time. The trials took 14 months. Donovan Pierce went first. He had been arrested at Apex's downtown office at exactly the same moment Sandra was being handcuffed in courtroom 7. The evidence was extensive: 8 years of systematic fraud, 49 million in documented false deductions and misrepresented income across 11 related entities, 17 cooperating witnesses who had been waiting, some of them for years, for an investigation that could make the case stick. Pierce's defense team was expensive and creative, and it didn't help him. He was convicted on 28 counts. The judge gave him 19 years. I was in the gallery when the jury came back. Pierce looked at me across the courtroom, and whatever he had expected from that look, defiance, satisfaction, some final exchange between adversaries, he didn't find it. I just looked at him, and then I looked away, because he wasn't the point. He had never been the point. Sandra accepted the plea agreement on the third offer. She had held out longer than her attorneys advised, convinced, I think, that Pierce's resources would somehow reach backward in time and repair things. They didn't. The plea took conspiracy to commit tax fraud and reduced the obstruction charge. The judge sentenced her to 4 years, with possibility of earlier release. It was a fair outcome, given everything. I don't say that coldly. I say it because I spent 31 years watching what fair looks like when the evidence is what it is. Claire cried when I told her. She sat in the kitchen of the house. We'd moved into a 3-bedroom rental in a decent school district. Nothing fancy. Enough. And she cried with the kind of quiet that is worse than sobbing because it means someone has gotten somewhere past shock and into the actual weight of a thing. She still loves you, I said. Whatever happened, whatever she did, that hasn't changed. I know. Claire wiped her eyes. I know she does. This wasn't your fault. None of what she chose had anything to do with you. I know that too. She looked at me. Does it matter? Knowing it? I thought about that honestly. It helps, I said. Slowly. Give it time. She visited her mother once a month. I drove her to the facility and waited in the parking lot and drove her home. I never asked what they talked about. That belonged to them. Life rebuilt itself the way life does not all at once. Not along any plan I had made, but gradually, through the accumulation of ordinary days. Claire transferred to the local public high school and was initially aggrieved by every aspect of it, and by spring had joined the debate team and made 3 friends she genuinely liked. She started, in small ways, to talk to me about her mother with something other than pain, a story she wanted to share, a phone call that had gone better than expected, a tentative and effortful kind of hope. I went back to work in a different form. Carol's team asked me to consult on 2 cases where my specific knowledge of the Apex documentation was relevant. That turned into a part-time arrangement with a financial crimes consulting practice, 4 days a week, flexible hours, work I knew how to do and that still felt worth doing. Enough money to live comfortably and be home in the evenings. Walter came for dinner on a Thursday in November, about a year after the whole thing ended. We sat on the back porch after Claire had gone upstairs, and Walter had a beer and I had coffee, and we watched the neighbor's dog investigate the yard through the fence. She's doing better, Walter said, meaning Claire. She is. Better than I expected, honestly. Kids are resilient, the ones with reasons to be. I didn't say anything to that. You gave her a reason, Walter said. I gave her the truth, I said. That's not always the same thing as a reason. Walter was quiet for a moment. He turned his beer in his hands. Pierce got out. Any chance on appeal? His team filed 2 motions, both denied. He's at FCI Cumberland. 19 years means he'll be 74 if he serves the full term. Walter nodded. And Sandra. I looked at the yard. The neighbor's dog had found something interesting near the fence post and was investigating it with the single-minded attention that dogs apply to everything worth finding. She started a financial literacy program inside, I said, teaching other inmates basic accounting. Budget management. I paused. They say she's good at it. Walter made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something else. Of course she is. She wrote me a letter 3 months ago. I read it twice and put it in a drawer. What did it say? That she understood, now, how it had happened. How Pierce had managed it. How each step had seemed small enough to explain away until the steps were too numerous to walk back. She didn't ask for anything. She just wanted me to know she understood. Walter looked at me. Do you believe her? The question hung there in the November air, and I thought about it the way I try to think about everything that matters without deciding what answer I want before I've actually thought it through. I believe she's telling the truth about how she sees it now, I said finally. Whether that understanding came because she genuinely reckoned with what she did, or because prison gives you a lot of time to develop the narrative that makes you most sympathetic to yourself, I can't know that. Maybe she can't know it either. I picked up my coffee. I believe in the possibility of people changing. I always have. But I also spent 31 years watching what people do when they think there are no consequences. And the distance between who someone is and who they tell themselves they are can be very large. Walter nodded slowly. That's a careful answer. I'm a careful person. Since when? I laughed. It surprised me the ease of it, the way it felt like something that had been stiff and needed to stretch. Fair point. Claire came down for water and paused in the doorway when she heard me laughing. What? She said. Nothing, I said. Walter told a bad joke. That's almost everything I say, Walter confirmed. Claire considered us both with the expression of a 16-year-old who has been disappointed by the humor of adults before and has come to terms with it. She got her water and said goodnight and went back upstairs, and Walter and I sat in the quiet that came after. I thought about the courtroom. About Martin Voss's expression when he looked at my flannel shirt. About Judge Rusk's face when I said my name. About the sound of the handcuffs and my wife's voice and my daughter crying in the gallery in a way I hadn't been able to go to her and fix because I'd had to hold still and let the trap close. I thought about all the mornings in my rental apartment, the coffee at 4:30, the encrypted drives, the work that looked like nothing from the outside. I thought about the question people ask when they hear this story, or the version of it I'm willing to tell, which is always some variation of, was it worth it? Here's what I know. I'm 62 years old. I have a daughter who is beginning slowly, painfully, with appropriate skepticism to rebuild a relationship with a mother who is trying to understand what she did. I have a consulting practice that keeps my mind working. I have a back porch and a neighbor's dog and a friend who tells bad jokes on Thursday evenings. And I have this. The knowledge that when the moment came, I did not look away from the truth because it was complicated or expensive, or because the person I loved was on the wrong side of it. People will size you up by what you're wearing, what you drive, what you earn. They'll decide what you're worth based on information they gathered in 30 seconds, and they'll arrange their behavior toward you accordingly. Martin Voss looked at my flannel shirt and saw a man who had already lost. Donovan Pierce looked at a retired government worker and saw someone too small to be a problem. Let them look. Because the truth doesn't need a good suit. It doesn't need an expensive lawyer or a fancy address or the approval of people who have already decided the outcome. The truth just needs someone willing to carry it long enough to put it down in the right place. I did that. In a Goodwill flannel shirt, on a Tuesday morning in February. In a room where I'd been dismissed before I opened my mouth. I did that, and I would do it again. If you have someone in your life who's been told they're not enough, who's been written off, overlooked, counted out before they got a chance to play their hand, share this with them. Because sometimes the person who looks like they have nothing is the one who's been quietly holding everything. Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every single one.